Hello there, and welcome back to the Kerbal Space Program New Zealand Reborn series, where once again we're going to start off in the mission control to accept a station resupply contract, another Ike science contract, and then a triple tourist orbit mission. Now, in theory, we don't actually have a capsule that's large enough to hold 4 Kerbals, 3 tourists, and a pilot. Thankfully, our engineers decided we could just weld a smaller one on top of an existing capsule, and that way it gives Jeb enough room to pilot them. So we're going to send Carly, Clary, and Gilsey to orbit here under command of our very experienced and veteran pilot, Jebediah McLaughlin. We, of course, keep our tourists' last names confidential as a sort of a business practice, a secure data agreement, a contract to make sure that our tourists don't feel like their privacy is being invaded. Publicity on these missions is also not quite as high as on some of the other ones, but what can you do? We actually do have the option of accepting quite a few tourist contracts, but a lot of them are like visit an asteroid with a tourist or build a space hotel, and theoretically we could do that, but I'm not super confident in our life support technology at the moment because, currently we only have like 3 types of life support containers for consumables on board stations. Consumables being like water and food and things like that. Yeah, we don't have a lot of containers available to hold that kind of stuff. Now, in my old save, I used to just put the life support into those big like geometric containers that if you might have seen on the side window. Regardless, I used to put our supplies in those, but I changed around a couple mods, and that doesn't seem entirely possible anymore. Well, regardless, we have recovered all 3 of those Kerbals. Safe and sound. And jumping right into the next mission here, very quick succession, but we actually had produced 2 of the Archer probes. And so this one, we're going to roll it out to the launch pad and actually send it to Eve because I was in the tracking station and I just discovered that an Eve transfer window was actually right on top of us. So it seemed a opportune time to try to launch one of these, our first Eve mission actually, and get us some science from that. This one doesn't have a heat shield, so I'm not going to try to have it enter the atmosphere, but named after Kapua 1, so this is the Maori word for cloud. Now that wasn't so hard, was it? I originally didn't plan on doing a ghillie landing, but its gravity is so low that I was already in orbit. It pretty much, like, why wouldn't I? That actually, the takeoff from ghillie, that was actually a physics glitch that made it jump into the air. I think you've seen it in some of the footage on, like, Minmus and stuff. Anyway, now that it's done, we don't have to go back there, at least not for a while. So our next contract is to land on Eve, and that's going to require entering the atmosphere and surviving long enough to get to the surface. So we're going to send a pretty identical, but it's got a foldable antenna and a heat shield on it now. This is gonna be the Capua 2 mission to Eve, and these sort of missions don't actually get us that much science, but it sort of unlocks new contracts and stuff. It's a stepping stone for other missions, so it's sort of something that we have to do. It pushes frontiers regardless. So, yeah, day 278 in 1972, well into the second half. But we're going to go ahead and do another Eve mission. The completion of our second Eve contract that actually gets us enough money to upgrade our research and development center, unlocking the entire rest of the tech tree. And I go ahead and grab with the science we gathered from Eve, the Advanced Unmanned Tech Science node. That gives us another probe core, and I think it unlocks the guided docking and rendezvous with MechJeb. So I no longer have to do that manually because I've already done that at least 3 times before. Probably more, if I recall. But our next mission is going to be a purely scientific mission to Dres. There's a transfer coming up in some amount of days. I forget. It might be in the footage, but I'm doing a voiceover now, so that doesn't matter. I designed a new rocket for this entirely because it's a quite large probe. Yes, you can see day 55, 1973. And I'm calling this the Arkenstone 1, after, of course, the Arkenstone from The Hobbit. The rocket itself, the launch vehicle, technically in the game, I have not named it yet, but it is going to be called the Bradshaw 1 after Margaret Bradshaw, who was a British-born New Zealand geologist and retired staff member at the University of Canterbury. She is considered a trailblazer and influential female role in Antarctic research. So there you go. I totally did not just read the Wikipedia article from my phone. Yeah, Antarctica research is something that I've never really been interested in myself in real life. Regardless, we've actually completed enough planetary transfers that 3 to be exact, that I can actually have MechJeb do the advanced planetary transfers for me now, which is quite nice. So I'm going to go ahead and capitalize on that to get us a nice little transfer with Dres. It doesn't quite intercept, so I use the RCS thrusters on board to adjust course a little bit, and that gets us a nice little intercept with Dres. Dres is not very exciting, not very interesting by itself. It's just a big rock ball in the middle of the asteroid belt. It is the Ceres analog, if I am not mistaken. Heading away from Kerbin there at breakneck speed. It's not something that's going to be that bountiful in terms of science, but it'll unlock contracts again. Similar to the Eve missions, it unlocks more contracts for us and it'll get us some money. I like the design of the solar panels that I put on here because it's quite far from the sun, so obviously I need more solar for it to have enough power. But we have a moon contract to complete, and we have 3 astronauts that are on the ground. We're going to send them up to the moon and hopefully get some more science from it.
T-minus 17. Final guidance release. We'll expect engine ignition at 8.9 seconds. 10, 9,
8, 7, ignition sequence started. All engines are started. We have ignition. 2, 1, 0. We have a liftoff. We have a liftoff, and it's lighting up the area. It's just like daylight here.
But alas, you have seen plenty of MUN missions before. If our nomenclature serves us correctly, this would be the 6th one. Although I do recall that the first Ithil mission was a failure due to an engine malfunction. That was when Valentina Yuliana was piloting. Rest in peace, of course. But these MUN missions are quite routine at this point. We've got a few under our belt. There's nothing really more complex that we're adding to this, although in a slight twist, we are going to have a new pilot. What's his name? Oliver Nicholas. We're going to have him pilot the lander to go to the lunar surface. We have to go to the lowlands to complete a contract, but we are planning on hopping around about 3 times this time instead of 2, because we want to test the limits of the mission profile, and it's had a little bit of Delta V left over before. So we land once, hop around again, land a second time, launching off trying to get to the highlands. And this is where the first mistake happens. Up until now, it's been very routine. But that landing turns out was not needed, as the landing site was not ideal for gathering data, so we have to perform another landing, already very low on fuel. Now here is where the second mistake is made. While exiting the lander can, a mechanical malfunction in the landing legs causes Nicholas to be flung hundreds of meters across the lunar surface. He somehow manages to survive and miraculously rights himself before making his way back to the lander can to try and get back into orbit to rendezvous with Ithil 6. Now Nicholas realizes he does not have enough fuel to get a full lunar orbit. He is now stuck on the surface, but he attempts to do an orbit anyway. In a moment of quick thinking and heroism, he grabs the science inside the lander can and performs an EVA exiting the capsule, and now relies solely on his EVA pack to try and boost himself as close to an orbit as possible. Oliver Nicholas is now adrift in orbit without a capsule. He only has 2 hours of air left before it runs out, and radiation poisoning will affect him if he doesn't get inside a capsule soon. Now, he is trying to radio Jebediah McLaughlin, who is inside the Ithil 6 capsule. Jebediah knows that he can try to do a rendezvous with the newly upgraded computer equipment for doing rendezvous with ships in orbit. He tries to get an intercept with Oliver Nicholas, who is stuck in orbit of the Mun. Through Jeb's expert piloting skills, he manages to change his trajectory in order to get as close to Nicholas as possible, and he has now got visual on him. Boosting very gently, trying to get as close as possible. If he goes too fast, he may crash or he may miss. This is a very tricky maneuver, but Nicholas is holding out strong. His life support is ticking down, 20 minutes left. Trying to get as close as possible, his life support still ticking, 18 minutes. Approaching 17 minutes, Nicholas manages to rendezvous and get inside the capsule, saving his life and allowing all 3 Kerbals to return to Kerbin in one piece. The Ithil 6 disaster will go down in history as one of the greatest disasters without loss of life in spaceflight history. That was a very tricky maneuver, but thankfully all of these Kerbals are making it back home. And more importantly, Oliver managed to grab us all the data from the lander can. So we've got enough science to pick up a couple new things. Make the most out of tragedy, I guess. So we're going to pick up very heavy rocketry, and then the nuclear power research. So that's going to be fun to play with later.